Hi, my name's Don Gray. Welcome to Artist and Critic. We're continuing our painter's view of art history, and we're going to continue with the idea that the Impressionists were solid painters of reality, despite the fact that Monet, in his personal search to express what was most meaningful and deep within him, lost a sense of form in many instances, going toward a vague, misty dematerialization of form. In essence, he was painting reality as much as the others are painting the people they know, the friends, their surroundings, the buildings, the landscapes, the cabarets, the cafes, and so forth. And the 20th century will fail to take up the challenge of the Impressionists, who are the last great realists in the history of painting, and will devote themselves to exploring their own inner worlds. The 20th century painters will, utilizing the Impressionists' revolutionary technique of broken color, intensified, purer color, and using the Impressionist aesthetic revolutionary discoveries as impetus to freedom of their own creative attitude. And if we look at our first picture, we see Camille Pisarro's railway at Pange, and we see the tremendous reality of the form, the freshness of the setting, the beauty of observation, the feeling for what seems like sort of a dampish early autumn day or something of the sort. And this is Pisarro at his best, his solid, real best. This is Impressionism with the strength of form and the freshness of color and the feeling of observing reality from a particular point of view. Once you get the feeling of the painters, one senses Pisarro's solidity of form and his particular attitude toward his painting. Pisarro will also explore man, or in this case woman, in relation to the soil, following the inspiration of the Barbizon school painters, Millet and others, who go out and paint the peasants and the landscape setting prior to the advent of the Impressionists, the Barbizon school, an earlier movement in France in the 19th century. But this painting has a feeling of reality, obviously, of solidity, a certain feeling of the Impressionist technique with the speckling of the color, and the maybe we can get back to the painting at some point so we can see what it is, and a sense of the light and the shadow and the reality of form. And of course it's real, but it's also a symbol of man's union with the earth, man a part of nature with his roots in the earth. And of course this is what we've lost in our own time. Can you imagine seeing a contemporary artist painting a picture of a digger, as this is? We might paint a picture of a floater or a flyer or a hanger from some insubstantial limb not attached to a tree, because we've lost touch with earth and reality. But Pisarro, at any rate, hadn't at that time. See, we go to the next picture, and we can see Pisarro in a later picture, River Early Morning, where he has come under the influence of the post-impressionist, Georges Serra, and his pointillism. And we sense a certain hardening, a sharpening of the forms, more concerned with this rather minutely calculated technique of applying paint in little dots. And certainly it's an excellent painting and very convincing. And Pisarro, some will say Pisarro was admirably open-minded to follow the explorations of a younger painter. Pisarro was maybe 20, 30 years older than Serra. Cézanne will criticize Pisarro for leaving the true path, he called the great Pisarro in his early solid paintings, to follow what Cézanne felt was a blind alley. And when we come to Serra, perhaps we can explore that aspect of the technique. Let's go to another one of the great Impressionists, Edgar Degas, and we see this remarkable handling of reality in terms of realistic figures, solidly painted within a tremendously realistic three-dimensional space in a cotton office in New Orleans, painted in 1873. Degas part of his family was in New Orleans, and of course Degas was born and grew up in France, and he went to visit that branch of his family. Nobody today, well, you know, maybe nobody, rarely anybody, anytime could paint such a picture with a command of form and space and many figures in a tremendously convincing composition, but no one today could handle such a picture. Likewise, Degas at the races here. I mean, it's a beautiful pictorial construction. There's a certain simplification of form, a flattening of form that is one of Degas' attributes that perhaps comes from Japanese prints as well as his own concern for two-dimensional form. But there's a sense of real space as well, and we see very clearly this particular painter's interest in reality, in the convincing sense of form, and people involved in their activities, and then the artist observes what's significant to him or her and makes art from that reality. And we see Degas again at a cafe concert in 1877 or so, making his unique personal creative statement from the reality that interested him. And it was the reality of cafes, of races, of the cabaret, of the street, of the ballet, and of ordinary working people doing whatever they are doing, ironing clothes or people shopping and buying hats, as we'll see in a moment. But, you know, what a creative, powerful design, how beautifully he links the area of the audience with the people on the stage. We see the linking of the hats, the dark hats, the top hat on the left, the bass viol on the right, the handle of it going up, serving as links between the two worlds, in a sense. And what wonderful things he does in the audience with the hats of the people, how vigorously and directly he paints the faces there, how beautifully he designs the top part of the stage where those globes of light seem to echo the gesture of the outstretched arm. At the Milliners, a pastel done in 1882, we see what is perhaps Degas' legacy to the 20th century. As we said earlier in introducing the past program or two, the 20th century rejects reality. Rejects it because I think it's simply too difficult to face in the 20th century. There are too many horrors, the horrors of war and the fact that the 20th century is a period of transition where all values are lost or shaken. People lose faith in themselves, they lose faith in the world, and by losing faith in the world they say, well, whatever's out there doesn't really matter. See? So they move away from the outer world, they retreat inside themselves, and they search for a security within that is denied without. See, well, I'll go inside myself, I'll build my little ivory tower, I'll weave my fantasy, I'll explore my emotions. It's the age of psychiatry and Freud and Jung, and the age of art withdrawing from the world, an art that in many instances there's a certain schizoid quality to it, a paranoid quality to it, if you will, a tremendous feeling of threat, and also a feeling of artists desperately trying to find stable ground, desperately trying to remain human in many instances. We think of some of the expressionists like Nolde and so forth, and we'll talk about all these when we come to it. But what the 20th century will take from this pastel by Degas are the design innovations, the fact of cutting off a figure, the fact of creating a marvelous two-dimensional pattern on the surface, utilizing the dark silhouette of the figure in the upper left, moving down through her arms and the dangling ribbons of the hat and the dark inner recess of the hat to the dark shape of the woman who will eventually try it on, and the darkness broken by the pattern of her head and her hands reaching up to tie the ribbon at her hat. There's a wonderful oriental feeling in the design. The source comes from the Orient, Japanese prints, and Degas uses what is almost a candid camera viewpoint where we quickly focus on a moving scene and we get to the essential of it. We don't artificially put everything in the center and contain all the figures in the center. The 20th century will ignore ordinary people doing ordinary things, but they will go for the aesthetic elements, as we said at one point. Degas was greatly admired by a fellow impressionist. I guess you could call him an impressionist or a post-impressionist. He's sort of a transitional figure. The artist Henri Toulouse-Lautrec, who broke his legs as a youngster. Maybe we can go to the picture on the screen. And we see a painting of him by the artist Vuillard. This is not a self-portrait, but the artist maybe 4'6", something of the sort. His legs healed but never grew again because of congenital problems of heredity. Lautrec will paint his masterpieces, masterpieces of the underworld, the entertainment world in Paris, the brothels, the Moulin Rouge nightclub, the habitués of the brothels and the nightclubs, as well as occasionally portraits of the aristocracy from which he sprang. He was a noble man who sought the fulfillment of his life in the underworld, so to speak, amongst other rejects of society, because no doubt he felt himself too to be a reject because of his dwarfed appearance. And through the physical and emotional suffering that he undergoes because of his ailment, he will kill himself with alcohol by the time he's 37. But in this marvelous picture at the Moulin Rouge, the figures are dancing. There's a tremendous sense of design, the Japanese influence again. It's two-dimensional pattern of a dark horseshoe shape, in a sense, from the lower left going back into the depth and coming forward again to be capped by the woman in the pink with the feather boa and the feather hat, with the dancing figures, probably La Golou, the fat one who's not yet fat, dancing with her red stockings in the center with another well-known figure with the bendy legs, who was known for his dancing ability, and Lautrec, Mr. Bones or something, I forget his name, but what a wonderful sense of reality, what a wonderful sense of design. Lautrec's masterpiece may be a painting entitled At the Moulin Rouge, where we see Lautrec himself at the back rear of the picture. We barely see his little head at the top of the picture, between the woman with the light pale clown's face and the man with the dark hat on the right, and we see Lautrec directly above the woman in the orange hair, dwarfed by his towering cousin as they walk through the Moulin Rouge. This picture is a masterpiece of design, of drawing, of color, of little accents like the woman's little left finger gleaming against the light table, of the woman on the right cut off by the picture frame through the influence of Degas, very much admired by Lautrec, as I say, and the wonderful effects of the stage lights or the gas lanterns flickering green on her forehead, the yellow hair, the black cap with the springing little berry-like sprigs, the red lips, and the wonderful curving drawing of her arm that is more shape than form, and yet somehow suggests both. There's a marvelous unity to the picture, a wholeness. The forms are solid, but they're also magnificent shapes, so that we have a feeling of a tremendously integrated design structure. And perhaps La Golou, again, ceasing her dancing, fixes her hair in the back right of the picture, where she barely just comes into the picture there. Compare the structure, the convincing reality of this, the pattern strength of the picture with what I consider a terribly weak picture by a contemporary painter, Philip Pearlstein, of William and Bennett, aping the effects of the camera. The picture is without structure. We see it disintegrating into a flabbiness of wrinkles and folds that diminish the impact, the sense of the form, and it simply is like a snapshot taken without care or composition, with none of the sense of intuitive and consciously planned design strength that both Degas illustrated in his At the Milliner's and Lautrec at the Moulin Rouge. The tremendous reality of character that is in those two painters, Degas and Lautrec, see how it is lost in a contemporary portrait, we might say, by de Kooning of Mark Rosenberg, done in 1957, where personality is destroyed through the imperiousness of the style of the artist. The artist says, my style, my way of doing things, I will make a de Kooning before I will make a Mark Rosenberg. Now, people might say, those who know Mark Rosenberg, de Kooning has expressed something of his personality or a feeling about him in the swaths of paint and the combinations. Not knowing Mark Rosenberg, I cannot cling to that rather tenuous thread, but from my point of view, it may be marvelously expressive as paint, but it remains basically an aesthetic manipulation without the fierceness that legitimizes de Kooning when he is legitimate, and leaves us with the dregs of the aesthetic experiments of the 19th century of the Impressionists and the Post-Impressionists, whom we'll be getting to. See, this is comparable in 1957 to Picasso's obliteration of form and people and humanity in his early analytical cubist period. Now, frankly, I think in this painting of Vollard, the Ambroise Vollard, the famous collector and of painters and a dealer of painters, really, paintings, I think Picasso is giving lip service to Vollard, flattering him by making a likeness of him, even though he breaks up the forehead in cubist planes, while disintegrating the body, saying, I'd better handle Vollard with kid gloves because he's a power in the art world. Let me give him some respect as an individual person. When Picasso paints people who do not matter or who are not friends of his, he totally destroys the face into crystallizing, collapsing planes of form that symbolize the destruction of humanity in the 20th century by the forces that are inherent in that in that century. Compare the destruction of this picture and that of Mark Rosenberg with what a sculpture from Roman times, the head of a Roman in 80 BC. Look at the character. I mean, I'm not personally a great admirer of either Roman art or particularly Roman administrative and warfare. There's zeal in warfare and zeal in administration, but who can deny the tremendous sense of reality and character here, the gnarliness of the cheeks, the powerful blunt nose, the lower lip, the crimped upper lip. Perhaps he's a senator, but he looks more like a gladiator or a fighter, or a fighter in the ring, you know, with his battered face. But what a tremendous reality, what a tremendous character study, and, you know, my God, how much we've lost in the 20th century. See, Kurt Vonnegut, the novelist, will say that we'll wonder, has a modernity so wrecked us that we'll never rise again? See, has it so destroyed our sense of our humanity, our belief in life, our belief in anything, that all we can do is piddle out a thin stream of creativity like a feeble old man urinating in the snow, you know, barely able to make a hole, melt a hole in the snow. Perhaps, in a rather grim analogy, that's where we are in contemporary art. In our next picture, we're moving into the world of Georges Serra, the post-impressionist, and we'll see how utilizing impressionist light and a derivation of impressionist technique, he will sterilize and solidify and, to a certain extent, dehumanize the world. He'll dehumanize his world. Now, here in a study for what is probably his masterpiece, or at least his early masterpiece, Sunday afternoon on the island of Le Grand Jatte, an island in the Seine River outside of Paris. We have a study for that picture. Unfortunately, I don't have the final painting itself, though I have a detail of it. The final picture is very precisely boundaried, strong contours, and the figures stand stiff like columns that will support some portico someplace. They lose their humanity. Even here, where the paint is rougher, because it is a study and it's not finalized in small, tiny little points of paint, dots of paint. We see the figures as basically tubular. We look at the foreground, man with the red shirt, the lower left in his legs, like a tube. We might concentrate on the two figures at the right, the man and the woman, because we'll see a detail of that in just a moment. They're like columns stiffly supporting themselves. There's a certain reality to it, I don't deny that, the strength of light and shadow, but the figures are stiffly posed to a certain extent. We do look at the detail of the right-hand figures. We see the more insistent tiny dots that Serra tries to work into a rather cold mathematical formula for painting. He believes that he has rules for painting that can be followed, that no real creativity is involved, no sense of intuition, artistic inspiration, that kind of thing. And I would say, first of all, that it isn't true, that it's not possible to paint that way, but that it is understandable that an artist would feel that way during the time of increasing tension toward the end of the 19th century. The Le Grand Jatte is painted over a period of 2 years, 1884 to 86. Those who know about art, about the Art Nouveau period at the turn of the century, which is a movement of stress and strain and anxiety, we'll talk about it in, of course, the 20th century, that artists like Serra seek an artificial order, a control over life. They hope, in an unconscious sense, through their formulas, through their precise painting style, they are in control of the chaos of life. Not in style, but in attitude, Serra in these pictures is very close to Mondrian, trying to create a lasting structure amidst the pounding of World War I and its cannons. So we look at the stiffness of these people. One could not say that they are exactly robust living specimens of humanity. This isn't to say that it's not an excellent picture, but they become almost mannequin-like, which is obviously extremely symptomatic of our time. Go to a picture called The Models, painted in 1888. The figures are a little more human. The flesh, they see maybe because they're nude, they seem more fleshy. They're in the intimate setting of a studio interior. He's obviously had one model pose in all three positions, and we see Le Grand Jatte hanging on his studio wall, a painting that is, perhaps 8 feet high, 12 feet wide, something like that, unable to really exhibit it anywhere except at exhibitions of the independent artists. No one will buy it, so what does he do with it? Roll it up in a corner or hang it on the wall? And he hangs it on the wall, presumably, if this picture is any evidence. We'll look at a study for the figure on the right-hand side, and we'll have a close-up, a closer view of the technique of Georges Serra. It's as if he's already heard about atomic theory or molecular theory, and who knows, perhaps he has. It's as if the molecules or the atoms are beginning to dance within the figure and the world at large, and because we're aware of atoms and molecules, we no longer can understand or believe that a body can be solid, a floor can be solid, that the world is solid. We lose our faith. We lose faith in the reality of the world. We're overwhelmed by science, the scientific method, scientific view of the world, and form begins to crumble. And this, again, is a symptom of late 19th century art, and it flows directly into the 20th century. The 20th century will not basically explore pointillism, but it certainly is going to follow Serra's lead, Monet's lead, and destroy form. It will also use paint for its own sake, simply as it destroys form, because what Serra is doing in the picture is freeing paint from the description of reality. We go to another picture, and we see another de Kooning, the Via Borghese, painted in 1960, and it's simply swaths of paint. In no way in the style of Serra, but without those 19th century painters freeing up the idea that paint can be more than simply descriptive of form, de Kooning would not exist. Obviously, he's more related to Van Gogh than Serra, but there's still the freedom involved there, the principle of it. We go to another not a painting, but a construction of mixed media in 1960 by an artist named Bruce Conner entitled Snore. For what reason, I'll let you decipher. Obviously, this has nothing to do with Serra in terms of pointillist technique, but it's not too far-fetched to say that it is an advance, not an advance. Personally, I think it's a decline, but it's a variant of what will happen when the artistic technique is freed up and artists say, well, geez, you know, I can do anything with the paint, I can do anything with my materials, let me combine it in any way I want to. The direct ancestor of this is probably Marcel Duchamp, a Dadaist, but all of these things spring from the 19th century, and we'll talk about them as we go along. In another next painting by Serra, we see the Eiffel Tower in the process of disintegrating. Fairly solid at the bottom, though composed of his pointillist dots, it vaporizes as it rises to the sky. Now, it's my feeling that Serra, I've spoken about him a couple of years ago, dedicated a black and white program to him, and I'll briefly go into him this time and next about the fact that despite the fact that he has a tendency in his finished pieces, what he considers his major paintings, Le Grand Jatte, the Circus coming up, and some others we'll see, he tends to freeze and to a certain degree sterilize his figures, dehumanize them. Serra, underneath, is a deeply emotional person. There's something very melancholy and brooding about him if you see those dark drawings of his that are just silhouettes. And in some of his early paintings and later paintings as well, there are hints of this deeper, what I consider romantic, emotional self. And I have the feeling that the advance, the rise of that tower as it disintegrates, says something, there's something, I think, a spiritual statement being made, you know, rising above the darkness at the bottom of the picture to a spiritual state of blending with the universe. Matter evolves into spirit, and perhaps that's what happens in life. At least that's what the religious people tell us. We'll go to one more, Serra, as a hint of the underlying romanticism in him. Perhaps we'll be able to pick up the picture at some point. And we look at an early vase, a flower in a vase, painted in 1880. And there's something dark and mysterious and romantic and brooding about this picture. I have a personal feeling that whenever any artist paints a single object, he's painting himself. And I think this is a portrait of Serra in so many words. What we're doing, folks, is we're exploring the development of art from the reality of the 19th century into the unreality or the inner reality of the 20th century. And we'll continue it on the next program. I'm Don Gray. The program's Artist and Critic. Bye-bye.